Hey, everybody. My name is Russ Dobler. I'm president of a group called the New York City Skeptics. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to science education and the promotion of critical thinking. Um, this is part of something I like to do that I've kind of called the SkepComm series. We're doing this live. We're streaming this conversation live. And it is being recorded, so it will be on our YouTube page, I hope shortly, if you want to tell anybody about it, or if you know somebody who missed it. So yes, we are a nonprofit organization, and things like professional Zooms and websites cost money. So if you go to the top of the chat here, we have a link where you may donate to on the New York City Skeptics if you so choose. One of my other outreach efforts as part of the New York City Skeptics is that second link there. I run a science and skepticism section on an entertainment website called AIPT, where we talk about skepticism in and of pop culture and entertainment. And just so happens that in the month of February right now, we're posting an article every day in the honor of Darwin's birthday, which is the 12th. So keep coming back for all kinds of crazy things. We've already published something on how the chupacabra became a cool reptilian alien to a lame-ass mangy dog, and asking the question, were the victims of Havana syndrome suffering from mass psychogenic illness, and were the crew of the Enterprise suffering from the same in the Star Trek Strange New Worlds episode Subspace Rhapsody? So fun stuff. Today, we are talking with Daniel Loxton, who, if you've been around the skeptical community for a while, you probably know him. If you don't, you'll get to know him today. He was recently with the Skeptic organization, the Skeptic Society in California, up until very recently. We'll talk about that a little bit. And he's had a lot of thoughts about the community and how it's grown. And I kind of personally felt like we might be at an inflection point in organized skepticism now, or at least a time when we should kind of step back and take stock of where we are and where things are going. So Daniel, I've noticed some things he's been saying on Twitter, and they interested me. They piqued my interest. So I just wanted to, he and I have talked a little bit before, off air, if you will. But other than that, this is going to kind of be a free-flowing thing between the two of us. After we're done talking and we get tired of looking at each other, if you folks want to put questions in the chat, type out question in all caps, and with your question, and I'll read it off. And once we're done with that, we may open it up to everyone's voice channels, and we'll see how pissed off we're able to make people today. So, Daniel, let me see if I can unmute you here. I do want to keep people muted just for the first portion here. Daniel, okay, there's Daniel.
Hi there.
There's the man. How you doing, man? Oh, I love the Captain America throw rug. Excellent.
Oh, thank you.
Right up my alley. There we go. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Feeling just a little nervous, to be honest. I'm a bit rusty at this kind of thing.
Well, good. Well, like I said, we're just talking. There's nobody else here, man. All those other voices on the side, all those other messages on the side, those are just in your head. So just in case people are unfamiliar with what you've done in the past, can you tell us the usual stuff? How'd you get interested in skepticism, and what have you been doing with yourself for the past 20 years?
Well, I got interested in skepticism in the very early 90s or even late 80s, when I was introduced to a regional group we had here in my province, the BC Skeptics. And I was at the time just like a thoroughgoing believer in absolutely everything. I was religious. I was a broad paranormalist, and I devoured everything I could get on those subjects before realizing with some frustration that they weren't very helpful. In those days, everything you found at the school library, on TV, it all told you that the paranormal was real, and nothing else. You know, is just present some anecdotes and what do you think? But the implication always was that it was completely real. And then I went away to university, having been exposed briefly to the BC Skeptics, and realized that there was a better literature on these topics. And so then I discovered the Skeptical Inquirer, the back catalog there in my university library, and I just read them all back to the 70s. And then around that time in the early 90s, Skeptic launched, which had, you know, at the time, it was the first one to newsstands, and it had kind of a fresh feeling at the time. I became a big fan of that magazine, and then I struck up a friendship with the art director and co-founder Pat Lindsay, and started doing some pro bono stuff for them. And then in the early 2000s, around 2002, I took over Junior Skeptic for them, so the bound-in young readers magazine within Skeptic magazine. And I did that for 19 years or so.
And you, Junior Skeptic, I always tell people, if you've never, I wish that there could be like a bound edition or something of that, because I always tell people some of the best information. I think the most succinct refutation, if you will, or at least accumulation of the evidence or lack thereof of the Loch Ness Monster was in Junior Skeptic. And that was, honestly, it was, you know, I think a lot of us have gone through a similar thing where we believed in a lot of stuff at first and then kind of pulled away from it over time. And it was, I wanted to hold on to Nessie, man, because it just seems so easy. You know, it's a big animal. What's the big deal about a big animal? And I think it was your Junior Skeptic on the Loch Ness Monster that finally made me go, God damn it. I got to let that one go too. All right, fine.
I have a very soft spot in my heart for the Loch Ness Monster. My book with Don Prothero for Columbia University Press, Abominable Science, is based on Junior Skeptic research.
No, that's excellent.
My first children's book, Evolution, was also based on a two-part Junior Skeptic story.
So, and you also, and this is kind of getting to, yeah, maybe it might be fair to say that you've been a of movement watcher over time. In 2007, you wrote an essay called "Where Do We Go From Here?" It's also pinned at the top of the chat. Also, still available on the website of Skeptic Magazine. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this? This was 2007, so going on 20 years now. Hard to believe. Do you
Yeah,
want to tell us a little bit about why you wanted to do that and why you thought it was important? Why you thought it was important and what ended up in there?
well, I never knew I was kind of a manifesto guy, but it turns out I write these things at the drop of a hat. Um, at the time, skepticism had been running since, you know, organized modern skepticism. There are antecedents going all the way back to classical times, which is also an area of interest of mine. But the skeptics movement, as we know it, starts in '76. And then it rolls along in its quiet way in the background, doing what it can, reaches a certain level of kind of cultural relevance. Like, you know, there's a shout out to the Skeptical Inquirer in Jurassic Park 2, I think. Junior Skeptic was based on a shout out to Skeptic that appeared in The Simpsons. And yet it sort of plateaued through the '90s and into the early 2000s. There was a widespread attitude that you can only talk about Bigfoot, say, so many times. People who had been reading since the '70s were bored with a lot of the old topics. They were wanting to move on to new material, wider questions, a kind of broader scientism or rationalism. And at the same time, around 2007, that's when you have the birth of social media and podcasting, and tons of new people suddenly start flowing into the movement. many of them inspired by new atheism, which in turn is inspired by 9/11. And so there was a lot of open discussion at that time, and some grumbling about whether it was time to reboot skepticism into some other kind of focus area, a broader cultural focus. And at the time, as an old school skeptic and paranormalist myself, my position was no, actually, we need to redouble our efforts on this weird stuff because it hasn't stopped being relevant just because we've stopped being interested. There's always a new generation of people who need to know if there's a Bigfoot. They're curious about it. They've seen it on the History Channel or whatever. And the stuff that we know because we read about it in the 90s, young people don't know. And so that push and pull with the presence of conspiracy theories and paranormal claims and pseudoscience and whatnot, that's kind of an eternal thing. And furthermore, we don't know when something that seems quaint, like at the time, ancient aliens was a long forgotten topic. The satanic panic of the 80s was a quaint, long forgotten topic. But we don't know when those things are suddenly going to rocket back into cultural prominence and maybe metastasize into something more dangerous, which has in fact happened with QAnon since then. So that was my pitch at the time, was more study of weird things, a more serious study of weird things, and a new energy, new enthusiasm for doing that work that some people had started to find tiring.
Huh. And so over the years, you had a couple more essays come out. So that was maybe the beginning of the manifesto, as you put it. And then you had another one that was what do I do next, for the average person who wants to do something, which I saved and kept on my hard drive as a reference. And most recently, just in 2013, why is there a skeptical movement, was your as yet final musing on this subject. What can you tell us about those two?
Well, what do I do next was it was directly offered to those new arrivals, the people who were coming into skepticism and feeling enthused. There was a lot of enthusiasm in that period, but just generally not knowing, like, how can I contribute? Can I somehow help? I don't know. Tell me in your background. I know we talked before. You were interested in paranormal things, but that by itself, I mean, apart from discovering a more robust literature on the paranormal, that's not really the reason people get involved in skepticism. What did you hope that you might achieve by becoming
Oh,
an
well,
activist, becoming even just a reader?
yeah. Well, that's an excellent question. I was part of what led me, or what kept me in skepticism was, I guess I can say, in the 21st century, the word we'd use is fandom, a fandom of Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
I read all of his stuff. I came a little late. I didn't read anything Sagan until the mid 90s. But I liked science, and I thought I was good with words. So at times I would have a dream of being a science popularizer. Life takes you in weird directions. And I kind of put everything like that aside for a while. And then funnily enough, it was Nexus 2012, co-hosted by New York City Skeptics, where James Randi gave a talk, kind of similar to the things we're talking about right now. One of the main things he talked about was Peter Popoff, the faith healer, and his exposure of him. And of course, at that time, Popoff was just starting to kind of come back around, and everything old is new again, like you said.
Yeah.
And this is something we can talk a little bit more later on, I'm sure. Randy was such a great storyteller, and he would he told the story of the awful things that his wife would say to him in his earpiece to tell him about the people in the audience. And these
Pop-Off's
people,
wife, yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And these are people who had incurable ailments, and he would try to tell them that he could fix them. And as Randy was telling the story, he the further he went on, his voice kind of dropped, and he would just get quieter and quieter. And then finally, he paused for a second and came back up and yelled, "What kinds of people are these?" And it was just really, I mean, that's the funny thing. It's like we always say, like, hey, the facts are what influence people, or at least we hope that to be true most of the time. But it was that really emotional talk by Randy that kind of got through to me. It's like, I got a decent job. I don't really want for anything. I'm just twiddling my thumbs. I got to try to do something because he's right. Like, this is not something we need. This is not something the world needs.
That's exactly where I was going with that question, is that feeling of I've got to try and do something. So with those two guys that you mentioned, inspired a lot of us. And Sagan, the kind of inspiring through line of his work is, when you're in love, you want to tell the world.
Exactly.
And so he, he set this great example of passion for each of us having at least the chance to discover our birthright as citizens of the universe. And then Randy, very famously in those days, brought anger to the table, that people were getting hurt by swindlers and grifters, and somebody ought to do something. And yeah, those are. I've lost the train here a little bit, but those are the things that really brought me in. Is that uh, and I think it unified a lot of skeptical activity, a lot of it's really, those are the animating features of skepticism through from the beginning, and particularly in that period around 2007. I want to help somehow, and so that piece was meant to address that, and also in a period when skeptical organizations really did not talk to each other very much. There was some bad blood from decades earlier. I always had an interest, and we'll come back to this later today, but I had an interest in coalitions and coalition building. And so when I put that piece together, I brought in G.D. Scott from the NCSE. I brought in um, multiple, ostensibly competing skeptical podcast hosts, myself from the Skeptic Society. We just brought in people from every organization, to the best of my ability, to all address this question of how can I help? As a new arrival in this community, what can I do practically? And so we came up with a discussion of about, I think it was 101 we settled on. Practical suggestions of ways for people to get involved. Some of those have aged, but some of it stands up, I think.
And what about the final one? Why is there a skeptical movement?
Well, around that period, there was once again a great push to sort of change the direction of skepticism. There was and people have been involved for a long time will remember that period. There was a lot of infighting. Um, and I didn't want the thing that I love, scientific skepticism, to get lost as a concept in this kind of wider rationalism. That skepticism is not exactly the same as rationalism. It's not exactly the same as science. It's not exactly the same as atheism in particular, or secular humanism. It's its own practice with its own traditions and its own motivating factors that can bring together a coalition of people that other groups, other definitions of these parallel rationalist groups can't bring. So, for example, lots of people of faith have contributed to movement skepticism. It's hard for people of faith to contribute to an atheist movement. They're just not invited. And so I really wanted to talk about especially for people who came in after 2007 and had no experience with the 20th century versions of scientific skepticism. I wanted to introduce them to the prehistory of skepticism, how skepticism as a modern movement got established, and what its scope and reasoning around that scope and practice was, and to make an argument for those things. So that's what that piece was meant for.
So how at the time? Well, let's go
Yeah,
back 10 years or so,
sure.
or shortly after the final one. How how well do you think those things at the time accomplished what you hoped they would?
Well, I've never been important. uh,
That's a
I was
mood right there.
yeah, I was the guy who did the kids section, you know, and you know, I'm not Carl Sagan. I'm an illustrator, and so for the amount of clout I ever had with my tiny Twitter following and whatever, I felt that like those did resonate with people, and I felt good about them. I felt like I contributed something to the conversation. Um, the first
How
one in
about now?
particular, I got well. I'll come back to that, but the first one in particular, a lot of old school skeptics like Ken Fraser and Ray Hyman were really pleased with that one because they had spent decades working on something that was, you know, seemed in danger of getting lost in the wash.
Yeah. So how did we do in the year 2014? How do you think we all took what you said to heart or not?
uh,
Excuse me,
in
2024. I lose my decades. I'm an old guy.
Yeah, well, let me once again turn this back to you. How has the last decade in skepticism been for you and from your
Um,
perspective? Has it been a
so
period of
yeah,
peak activity and enthusiasm?
no. I mean, I suppose you can blame the pandemic on a lot, just like you can blame the pandemic for a lot of things.
That didn't
Um,
help.
no, it doesn't. Yeah, for sure. um, yeah, so I took, well, I could probably sum it up with this statement, but I will continue nevertheless. I took on the presidency of New York City Skeptics maybe 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, because nobody else wanted to do it. And that's not it's not a slight to my colleagues there because they were doing it since 2007, and if they wanted to pull back a little bit, it's well within their rights because they kept the flames going for all that time. But yeah, I mean, you look at our big event with the Skeptics Guide to the Universe, Nexus. I think we even like pre-pandemic, we were thinking of pausing live events, or at least the big live event of Nexus. And then they kind of took it fully virtual, which I think was a success. And then didn't even do it this year because they had the in-person less lectures, more fun Nauticon. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not attaching value judgments to any of this. That's just the way things went. And yeah, I mean, certainly dwindling attendance at meetings, and something that I think you mentioned the last time we talked, an enthusiasm deficit.
Yeah, and so you touch on another point there, which is which I've tended to de-emphasize, because I was involved before this happened, but around that 2007 period, a lot of those people coming in were they were arriving like via the JRAF forum. The James Randi Educational Foundation was at the time a significant organization, which now just doesn't exist. A lot of people were arriving to find their tribe, and they were going to conventions to hang out with their friends who they knew online. That community element is it's not primary for me, but it drives involvement. It drives enthusiasm for the work and support for the work. You know, if you're somebody excited enough to go and hear some lectures from you know paranormal investigators and Bill Nye, and pay for a hotel room, then you're excited enough to contribute to the work that undergirds all that. Uh, it was controversial, but as I recall, the very first suggestion in that "What do I do next?" Piece was, why don't you donate some money to a skeptical organization? And
Anyone can do that. That
anyone can
doesn't.
do that.
If you can
And
press a button.
and the thing is, but I just wanted to put it out there first, not because I was fishing for donations, but because, yeah, that's a thing that you can do. And there are things that organizations can do that just, you know, random volunteers cannot do on their own, and yeah, anyway.
Yeah. That's interesting. Um, so yeah, well, I mean, if anybody else in the chat, if you have any experiences with your own local skeptics groups or skeptical promotion, let us know. We'd be interested to see what you have to say. Um,
I
uh,
see in the I see in the chat there's a shout out for SciCon, which
yep.
is an ongoing. It's skepticism's largest ongoing event, as I
And
understand it.
they do pretty well. I only went to
Yeah.
the first one in Vegas. I haven't been able to get back since. But yeah, but again, is it, well, again, I see you, Rob, you're the one who pointed that out. Anybody else? How much of SciCon these days is, I don't want to use the word entertainment, but for the people, like, hey, let's talk about these things, and how much of it is getting involved? Because I think about that too, Daniel, what you said. It's like the skeptical movement, as it has been, I think it has that two prongs of, like you said, finding your tribe and activism. And some people want to do one and not the other, and some people are cool with both. And that's yeah, it's tricky figuring out what you want and what everybody else wants. um, and I guess the saddest thing, well, here's the thing. It's like, I think we can all probably agree that the ideas of skepticism are probably more needed than ever now. I mean,
Oh,
we
absolutely.
talked about the pandemic, and that's, you can point to that as why a lot of the conspiratorial stuff, or at least a contributing factor to why a lot of the conspiratorial stuff cropped up over the years. So, I mean, do you have any ideas, like, why, given that, why is there this enthusiasm deficit? Why has the believer stuff prospered and the rest of us can't seem to make anything happen? If you have any ideas?
Well, yeah. um, yeah, well, you're entirely correct. The This kind of work is more important than ever. Like, last few years have taught us that conspiracy theories uh, can bring American democracy to the brink of collapse, can cost hundreds of thousands or millions of lives during a pandemic, and distort and direct our global attention during a pandemic in which millions of people died. It used to be that old school skeptics, as long as there has been a skeptics movement, there is a perennial question of, why should I care about any of this stuff? I've written a lot about cryptids. People like Bigfoot, but does it really matter? And no, not in itself. Bigfoot's not that big of an issue, but some of these things matter, and they all do inform each other and talk to each other. And in the old days, we used to look at the South African example, that AIDS denialism in South Africa killed an estimated 300,000 people. Well, now we're at a period where COVID denialism and anti-vaccine scaremongering has been estimated to have killed 200,000 Americans, just Americans. And so the stakes are high. There's good reason for people to care about these things. And in fact, people do. It's been a really interesting period, which I have written about for the Skeptical Inquirer, that um, it used to be nearly impossible to get academics or mainstream reporters, journalists interested in the work of skepticism, with just a few very rare examples, counterexamples, but exceptions. Uh, but over the last few years, through the Trump years, and then especially into the pandemic, there has been a kind of cultural shift um, to acknowledge that maybe drowning as a society in an avalanche of disinformation and misinformation is a bit of a problem. And so academics have gotten involved even on studying things like the flat earth, but definitely in studying dangerous disinformation that either affects public health or public safety. So drifting over into extremism research as well. But notably, the people doing that new kind of disinformation research, doing misinformation reporting, they're largely not skeptics. They are altogether new arrivals or people who've come up in other parallel research streams, like, again, extremism research, which has always existed in parallel with, our Bigfoot investigations.
Yeah, and I definitely want to come back to that because I think that might
Yeah.
be the most salient issue here. But I do want to say that, despite the whatever enthusiasm gap or deficit that might exist, this is not to say that, like, I won't speak for you, but I'll speak for myself, and I say I'm not going to stand up here and say that people aren't doing good work, because obviously they are. Um, and I think one of the best steps in the right direction is Guerrilla Skeptics on Wikipedia, because that's where people go for their information, and and that's another one of those things where it's like, well, what do I do next? You may not be the best writer, you may not be someone who's going to lead or charge, but you can learn how to edit a Wikipedia article. That's something everybody can do in their free time.
Yeah, that was
Um,
one of my suggestions way back when, as contributing to Wikipedia.
yeah.
And it is, yeah, I think that's a notable success.
Um,
Much as I've
eh,
never been fond of the name they picked them for themselves, which has caused
yeah.
no end of mischief.
Maybe we can come back to that.
Yeah, but their work is a clear pro-social contribution. It helps.
Yeah. And to your point about to your point about, like, well, Bigfoot and things like that, do we really need to talk about these things? Well, it's like that was kind of the reason organized skepticism started in the first place, right? Because, like, serious, quote unquote, serious scientists didn't talk about astrology or Velikovsky or any of these things. So somebody had to get the information out there.
Exactly, and that's the very first action in organized skepticism was objections to astrology.
Yeah.
It
And look
was,
who's back.
yeah, exactly.
So yes, so you talked about what I wanted to get to mostly is that the people who are, let's call them the people who are doing skepticism, who don't realize they're doing skepticism, um, these extremism researchers, because the reason I reached out to you to have this conversation, because I noticed you saying things on Twitter about this sort of thing, about people who deal with, they don't call it skepticism, they call it misinformation or disinformation research. Can
Yeah.
you kind of tell us what you've been observing, kind of flesh out what you said a second ago?
Well, I've been following as many of those people as I can, uh, just trying to get a sense of the new landscape over the last couple of years. And there's a lot of them, dozens, hundreds over the, across the English language uh, spectrum. They're very loosely networked, much more loosely than the old skeptics have been. And
That's saying
so,
something.
well, yeah, but skepticism at least had and still does have national and regional umbrella groups, even if they're volunteer clubs essentially. But there are some nonprofits as well, and so skepticism does have and has had institutions. the Skeptical Inquirer, the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and affiliated groups like the
it's a much more DIY world now, isn't it?
Yeah, so now you have what has always existed since antiquity up until the 70s, is you have just the perpetual presence of bullshit in society, and then you have people wherever they may be feeling like they have to do something about that. And so reporters suddenly realizing that you can't really just do a horse race coverage of the US election. You actually have to talk about these underlying currents of conspiracy theories and denialism. Otherwise, you're misinforming the public. And so those people will just feel motivated to try and paint a clearer picture or try to get to the bottom of things as reporters or as anthropologists or as sociologists or whatever it may be. And they will find that other people are kind of moving in the same direction. And so there are these loose networks among them, but yeah, it's very loose.
Is there anybody you want to or could shout out in particular?
Well, I mean, a quick note of just like people I follow, like Kate Starbird at the UW Center for an Informed Public. And I'm so sorry, most of these names I've never said out loud before, and so I'm sure I'm going to butcher half of them. Sarah Aniano at the ADL Center for Extremism. Jennifer Mercieka. Timothy Caulfield, many skeptics will be
Right.
familiar with. He's a CSI fellow. I think Melanie Tracek King, also a CSI fellow. Cheyenne Sard R. Iazeda, BBC fact checker, who's been doing yeoman's work during the Gaza war, trying to clear up all the fake AI images that we're seeing proliferate, these propaganda images we're seeing on social media. He's the one tracking all those down and debunking them. And these go on. There's lots of reporters who've come to this.
Are there any
Brooke Binkowski, Brandy Zedrozny, Rachel Gilmore is now over at Check My Ads.
Maybe if well, it might be good. Well, I said this will go up on YouTube at some point. So
yeah,
maybe if you could send me that list or kind of collate some things and we can put it in the YouTube description when that goes up. Are there any?
A lot of those people are active on Twitter still to some extent, and much more now over on Blue Sky.
Well, let's talk about the new media landscape, though, because I'll just preface all that by saying this. I've loosely, but not really, kind of tried to bring up the idea of SkepComm to people as opposed to SciComm. I would say that's what I do at AIPT with my science section on AIPTcomics.com. It seems like I'll let you speak on this in a second too, because you're a careful watcher of these things, but it seems like in the 20th century, a lot of scientists, we saw the pushback that Carl Sagan got by his colleagues when he decided to popularize science to the public about why are you doing it? Why does that matter? Just do your work. And I think that was I think that attitude was sort of institutionalized, that it doesn't matter what people think, just do good work and get it done. But then when you started getting anti-vax stuff and climate change denial and things like that, just kind of like permeating the public, I think scientists started to realize that if you don't at least have some kind of say in your public narrative, somebody else is going to control it for you and for their own ends. And nowadays, I think almost every PhD program has a SciComm component. Like, you can't get away from it. It's become part of the public duty as a PhD, which 30 years ago, could you imagine suggesting that to a professional scientist? They would have thought you were insane. And I kind of liken that to like our magazines, Skeptical Inquirer, Skeptic, et cetera. I kind of liken those to our scientific journals. That's where you do your research and you get it published, and all the other quote unquote professionals see it and, oh, that's what this guy's doing. Oh, so that's what was really going on over there. But then, like, the average person isn't going to go pick up a copy of Skeptical Inquirer on the newsstand if they want to learn about Bigfoot or conspiracy theories. They're going to go to their favorite YouTuber. They're going to go to TikTok. They're going to, wherever they already are, that's where they're going to get their information from, right?
Yeah, and I'll just mention here. So part of what I have to say is a real downer message. It's a bummer, which is that skepticism right now is not very relevant. But all those TikTok and YouTube videos, that's all to a significant extent, those are inheritors of the work that skeptics have done for decades.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's like, maybe it is. It's just taken on a different form to some people.
So podcasters will have read the Skeptical Inquirer. The people who compile cracked top 5 debunked myth type clickbait stories.
And thank you for those people out
very
there
good
who do
stories,
that. Yeah.
actually.
How
there
stuff,
are some really good ones.
How Stuff Works, I've noticed, has some good skeptical material at sometimes without calling it skeptical. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, a lot of those things are drawing straight from research by movement skeptics and disseminating it out into a wider public, so that it just was not part of the national conversation, the global conversation in 1976, that people should care about science communication, or even more, and this was really uncouth of Sagan, care about paranormal baloney and pseudoscience. But now it is just part of the DNA of our culture that debunking is a thing, and sometimes it needs to get done. And so a lot of people have taken that to heart without realizing that they are inheritors of our project.
So I want to come back to that, but this was also something that you and I touched on in a previous conversation. The 2 most recent comments in the chat are about, well, they use the word, no, they don't. Not both of them, but they're ostensibly political questions. And in fact, I'll just read this person's. Jan says here, I'll read some of it. Sometimes when groups take a political stance on an issue that's tangential to their mission, they alienate some members away. And I know New York City Skeptics historically, and still to this day, we kind of shy away from anything political. We don't even talk about global warming that much, even though it's not a political issue. It's a scientific issue that's been unfairly politicized in a lot of ways. So, like I said, we talked about that a little bit, about politics creeping into skeptical activism. Do you have anything to say about that?
Oh, so much. Hard to know exactly where to start.
Quick apology to Benny, our New York City Skeptics founder, who loathes the idea of politics and skepticism. But go ahead.
So throughout,
is there any career, way? No, I'll let you go. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, throughout my career, I have been a very vocal defender of the traditional skeptical status quo of trying to keep skepticism as non-political as possible and as non-partisan as possible. And there's a really good practical reason to have adopted that norm, which is that you can build a bigger tent, you can build a bigger coalition when people of all different political backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, just
practically, that's a good reason.
It is, yes. And so if you want to bring together a bunch of people to talk about the anti-vaccine industry, you can bring together a bigger group of people to do that than you can to talk about the anti-vaccine industry and how God doesn't exist and how you should vote Democrat. Like, that's just a smaller pool of people. and so I have long defended this, and also for an even deeper practical reason, which is that a lot of skeptics are kind of nuts. like on political issues,
Oh,
on social issues. Oh yeah, we're a bunch of weirdos.
how dare you, Daniel?
And so I really have no reason to think that skeptics qua skeptics have anything to contribute uh, broadly useful or illuminating on political questions. I will draw my own opinions about most of those things. Um,
But
but the world has changed, and over the last 10 years of watching skeptics be broadly sidelined during some really important conversations about disinformation and misinformation, pseudoscience, conspiracy theories, and watching a new group of people grow up to address those things, really without much connection to the skeptics movement. I have a lot of questions about how to move forward. And if I knew the answers to those questions very firmly, I would have written another manifesto by now. But I definitely have questions. And yeah, that's my initial thought.
so, all right. So I'm glad we came back around to the people, the younger generation that is doing these things now. Now, you said, I believe you said that, as far as you can tell, a lot of these folks don't even know that organized skepticism is or was a thing. What should we tackle them and then say hello? What, like, it seems like, if I mean, these are people who care about what they're doing and care about people and care about issues, and it seems like if you do, you'd want to get the best information out there. And like I said, we have the journal articles that they could, hopefully, get to a wider audience. Like, where's the disconnect? Why don't they know? And is there something we should do about it?
Well, that's a really complicated question, or a bunch of nested questions.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you for that.
Solve it right now.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that they don't know is that skeptics, to some degree, have fallen silent for about 10 years. There was this period of kind of infighting. A lot of the progressives got fed up and left, and in this intervening period, this interlude of enthusiasm deficit, as we've talked about, and then the pandemic, uh, a lot of skeptics, a lot of our institutions, a lot of individuals, those who are still involved, and many people left again, um, kind of retreated into just doing our own thing. So I would do junior skeptic. I would try to make every issue the best thing that had ever been written on that topic to the best of my ability. And then I would look after my kids. And I was not, I was trusting that junior skeptic was my contribution to changing the world. And I think that that's largely happened. The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, the Skeptical Inquirer, under Ken Fraser, the Skeptical Inquirer. It always kept up a high level of quality, as far as I can tell.
Agreed.
I want to say that this is like a doldrum period in which people are still doing good work, and that work is not in its doldrums. It's still high quality, but with lesser salience somehow. And
Okay.
so,
That may
uh,
speak to, there's a question in the chat from Janine that says, I'm confused why you would say scientific skepticism is sidelined on misinformation. Maybe that kind of speaks to that question a little.
oh boy, there's so many nested questions now. I'm starting to lose track, honestly. Yeah, I think skepticism fell silent to a certain extent, and then the new people who have become involved, when they've heard of scientific skepticism at all, they've tended to hear about uh, some scandals. They've tended to hear about prominent movement atheists who they may not agree with on
Right.
issues such as feminism or Islamophobia. Um, so although there are movement skeptics or people associated with movement skepticism, like the climate scientist Michael Mann is another CSI fellow, a lot of these new people are not only independent, but if they've heard of skepticism, they don't like what they've heard.
Well, fortunately, Michael Mann, at least we've had him in a couple of times, so
Yeah.
he's not opposed at least.
No, he's fighting the good fight, and
Yeah.
yeah. So then the wider question is, what do we do about that? And I don't want to give anybody a sense of hopelessness about this. This work is more important than ever. It's more important to me than ever. I think there are things to be done in building coalitions, and the beauty of coalition building is mutual boosting and support. And so it used to be that my work, like these manifestos or my books, I would I had a professional network that could really help me uh, elevate my tiny little platforms to a much wider audience and make more of a contribution that way. And nowadays, I don't have that so much. I don't think anybody has that so much. But there are ways to build that again, or build it anew, or yeah, I think there's tremendous opportunity going forward to tell the world we're in love and to help to make a
Yeah,
difference.
that's very optimistic, which I appreciate.
But note that it's coming from a ground of like pretty serious pessimism at the same time.
It's not good, but it's not intractable.
Yes, exactly. I think a lot of the world's problems can be described that
way. Well, one of the things I thought of when you were saying that is about boosting each other and coalition building. So I guess, like I said, you could probably say I came into the quote unquote movement in the early 2000s. I think that might be, I don't know if that's when you might say things began to fracture to some degree.
Well, they did, although it was also a really heady period. It was the most exciting period ever in skepticism since the 70s, maybe. There were people, there were 1,200-1,400 people at these conventions we had, and people were just constantly coming up with new ideas in an environment that was not saturated with skeptic opinion content. People would go to those conventions and they'd come back just sparking with new projects and new connections.
Yeah. And but something, so speaking of maybe a
But the
fracture
result
to
was
some degree.
fracturing ultimately. Yes.
Yeah, I like what you said about boosting and coalition building, but I think sometimes people, again, this is my observation in the skeptical movement, have been reluctant to boost certain people for maybe smaller reasons than they should have. I mean, obviously there are differences among people, but I've heard people say like, well, I just don't like the way he does things, so I'm not going to have anything to do with him. And I worry that that may be an issue for coalition building, which I agree is what really needs to happen here.
It is an issue, and I do that too. I do it all the time. There's lots of
Yeah.
people I don't feel like boosting. Um, One of the solutions there is to realize that there are always new people coming in with things to say that you do want to boost.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not call themselves skeptics again, but they're people doing this kind of work.
And I think I want to read something here that Kay says in the chat. I think you would agree with this. The issues are misogyny, sexism, not so-called feminism. I'm pretty sure you would come down on that side of the spectrum.
Sorry, where is this?
It's one of the last few comments.
Yeah, agreed.
And if you made it seem otherwise in something you said, I'm sure that was unintentional.
No, not at all. Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
so I read a list of some of the just first 10 names that came to mind in this kind of new breed of researchers and activists. You'll notice they're basically all women. I think that cohort, I think it's at least 50% women, and they're all younger than me. They're younger than most of the people I see on this call. And they're becoming involved in a time when dangerous pseudoscience and conspiracy theories are massively lopsided politically. And so those people,
Which is not to say that there aren't conspiracy theories on all sides, but
of course not.
the influence and the potential danger.
Yeah. So, COVID deaths are partisan. That's how severe it is.
You can
And
look at the numbers.
yeah. And, and, it's those people are not going to have any patience for distinguishing between anti-vax conspiracy theories, anti-trans conspiracy theories, the political power dynamics that have toppled Roe v. Wade. Those are all one fight for most of those people, which raises these questions that I mentioned before. I'm not quite sure how skeptics should respond to that, but the landscape has changed.
Yeah. Well, speaking of politics,
Yeah.
or maybe a tangent on that question. So coalition building.
Yeah.
If you were to create a, again, I wasn't there for the beginning. You might have a little more understanding of this, but I understand from what I've read that Paul Kurtz of CSI was a very good organizer, and that's part of the reason that CSI exists in the way that it does today. That
Ken Fraser, the
yeah,
46, 47-year editor of the Skeptical Inquirer, praised Kurtz as an organizational genius, I think
right,
were his words.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, my question then is, if you could create such a person out of whole cloth to help us organize things now, to build coalitions, where would that person come from? Like, what would their background be? What would their skill set be like? Would it be somebody from politics rather than someone from science? Would it be someone from philosophy? Would it be a YouTube personality? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, so go ahead and
A
think
little
about
bit,
it.
a lot.
Well,
This is the big question.
what kind of skills? Yeah, I'm not asking you to point to an existing person, so I'm giving you a pass there. But I
Thank
am
you.
saying, if you could create such a person, what kind of skills do you think somebody like that needs? What kind of existing connection does somebody like that need?
So I think about this all the time, actually, and I'm gonna have to give you a bunch of chatter rather
Please.
than a clear answer.
There's no judgment in brainstorming.
Yeah. Uh, it's clear that the leaders that we just mentioned, the kind of my intellectual heroes that got me interested in skepticism, they've passed away, or they've retired, or they're late career. They're so there's clearly a need for new leadership, and particularly since I think that there is a need for a kind of modernization of skepticism and misinformation, disinformation. There's a need to bring these into some kind of consilience or convergence. I think that would be useful. But that's going to take leadership that I really don't know where it's going to come from. I don't see it arriving. I don't feel like that leader myself. I'd love to back somebody up like that.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know the answer, but I wouldn't want them to come from politics. I'd want them to be grounded in the ethos of science and scholarship. We'd want them to be young and exciting and have a clear voice, an inviting voice. I'd like them to be minimally cranky, both senses.
That's the new title of this talk. Let's be minimally cranky.
And that's the thing, because one of the themes of my work has been that you can be a perfectly competent critic of one or more areas of pseudoscience or conspiracy mongering or whatever, and also be a legitimate crank in some other area of your life. These are the good skeptic just basically doesn't exist, and that we should expect. That's one of the lessons of skepticism is intellectual humility. Writ large, that is just, there are no true rationalists. We all think emotionally. We all, we're all imperfect. But you'd want somebody who is not unduly burdened by crankish beliefs. Somebody who can be absolutely trashed and debunked on one particular vulnerability or a particular weird kind of bigotry or anything like that. You want somebody broadly appealing that people can support.
Right. So one other thing that I will bring up briefly, because this is a conversation that has happened probably since the beginning, certainly for the last 20, 30 years. The word skeptic and skepticism, and certain prominent people that we know and have worked with over the years have kind of pulled away from that for various reasons. I think some of them probably having to do with just the nature of the word, some of them having to do maybe with the community and the fractures that have been seen there. And I used to be, in fact, very recently, well, I'll shout out Benny, one of our co-founders, again, and he's been pushing the anti-skeptic argument for a while now, and because he edited the Rationally Speaking podcast, and when he would tell people about Rationally Speaking, people would get really excited, and they're like, oh, and he'd tell them, oh yeah, you can find it through the New York City Skeptics, and then they would immediately lose excitement, just because of some preconceived idea of the word. And honestly, I fought back against that for a while. I said, I had a similar thought process to a lot of people, was that it's a word, we're stuck with it. You can prehab it if you want to. That's something I've tried to do on AIPT Science. I had a whole section called Skepticism, and if you didn't know what that was, you can click on it and find hopefully positive things. But I feel like something may have changed recently, and I feel like both practically and otherwise, I see a lot of people, and you can tell me what you think about this, a lot of pro-conspiracy people, if you say anything that's not pro-conspiracy, they'll say, wait a minute, I thought you were a skeptic. It's like, well, what? and also, well, let's start there. Tell me, you have any experience with that sort of thing? And we talked a little bit too about how sometimes and you mentioned this a little bit, how sometimes skepticism gets conflated with atheism, and you can find use in skepticism without being an atheist, right? But that's always been there.
Yeah, so this is one of the oldest debates in skepticism. It comes up perennially and it never goes anywhere.
Right.
There have always been problems with the word skeptic. It's vague. It gets conflated with deniers. It sounds negative. But as Pat Lindsay, my friend, a late friend and mentor at Skeptic, used to say, well, we already bought the website. It says Skeptic right on the front of the magazine.
Well, that's a good practical argument. And to make another practical argument, I think if you sort of look for, I encourage everybody to do this. In fact, do both. Go to YouTube and search on your own account. So your algorithm will search things out for you, and then try it, find out, and see what happens. And I just tried this today, and it's not as stark as it was the last time I tried it, but try searching for skepticism, skeptic, whatever, and then try searching for something like misinformation or disinformation. And if you look for skepticism, you might even get some pro-conspiracy things I have something here on epistemology, which is a good thing, obviously, but I don't know how much that helps you in the practical day. David Hume, hey, there's Skeptics Guide. That's cool. Dumb things Christians say to atheists. I don't know how helpful that is. And I'm looking outside of my account now, so theoretically algorithm free. And then if I look for misinformation, I find why people fall for misinformation. The disinformation age, why belief in conspiracy theories, why people believe in conspiracy theories. Misinformation, the media, and the role you're playing in both. How big tech companies breed disinformation. John Oliver with the segment on misinformation. A lot of this seems, how right is Punxsutawney Phil? We talked about this earlier. Oh my God. To me, it seems like these words have kind of taken the place of a lot of things you would have called natural scientific skepticism at some point.
Yeah, and that may be the future, that that the Skeptical Inquirer, say, may exist forever under that title. As you know, so in the old days, you had a skeptics movement that called itself that, and then you had related organizations like the National Center for Science Education, very much a skeptical organization hosted by Eugenie Scott, one of the co-founders of the Bay Area Skeptics. But it just didn't go under that. It's under that umbrella. It didn't go under that banner, that name, that branding.
Mm-hmm.
That may be the future for us. That the skeptic branding gets eclipsed by misinformation or whatever. But at the same time, it has never been fruitful in the past to get together some brainstorming and try
Right.
to brand our way out of this problem.
I agree 100%, because
we're not just going to make ourselves into Brights or something. That's
exactly. And
like trying to give yourself a cool nickname.
It never works, does it?
No.
But I think it goes to something that, and I actually talked to Rob Palmer earlier in the week on a talk, that's a conversation we had that's going to be on Skeptical Inquirer website at some point, I think. And I came up with, I don't know, I just came up with this. So let's see what people think. If I had to come up with one sentence to encapsulate what I try to do in my outreach, and what might speak to this too, is that you go where the people are. And that's kind of my SkepComm ethos, is that we've got all our stuff in the journals. It's sitting there for anybody who wants it. But if you want people to see it, you go where the people are. And I don't have a personal stake in the word skepticism, keeping it, getting rid of it. I'm not telling anybody what to do or what they should do. But I'm saying it's something, if you want to get your work where the people are, you might want to use search terms that people are looking for. Just saying.
Yeah, and that similarly, that new breed of disinfo critics, whatever you want to call them.
Sure.
I was just thinking of, there's a woman named Mallory DeMille, considerably younger than me. She works on Twitter, where she just works. It's a hobby for her, a passion, avocation. She is just hassling the wellness influencer grifters.
Yes,
that's her entire thing.
Well, what's her name? I found her for you, and
Mallory DeMille, or This Is Mallory on Twitter.
I think she's a great follow. She's using all those new tools.
She's very entertaining. She's funny. She's sharp, and she's on TikTok, where I'm not, because I'm old. And so that's part of the, when we imagine the future, that's part of it, is that people who speak the languages of the young are going to be in the venues of the young, trying to help and tell the world they're in love.
For sure. Jay's giving me the business. Great point, Russ. We need to use the same marketing techniques that have been adopted by pseudoscience. Or maybe he's not giving me the business. Maybe he's serious. Jay, tell us. To your point, in either case, I say that he's serious. To that point, I say you notice I say I try to come up with a lot of elevator pitches and pithy things because that's what you remember. Because I'm an editor and I want people to read my shit. Um, Part of that is I say that you can't win the game if you're not on the field. And if people don't see your arguments, like theoretically, if we have, this is again not to get too political, but we talk about the marketplace of ideas, and you want to believe that the best idea, the best information always wins out, and usually it's whoever is more persuasive who actually wins out. So if we have the facts and they don't, and we're both being equally persuasive, you'd want to believe that the facts would win out. But if you're going to kind of dig in your heels and not play the game, then you're going to lose to the people who are playing the game. Part of the reason you don't debate creationists.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to unpack there too. We've known since the 50s and 60s, psychological research that if you want to persuade somebody, you cannot first convince them that you are an asshole. It just simply does not work, and you cannot tell them that they're an asshole, or they simply will not listen,
or that you're dumb for thinking these things.
Exactly, and by implication, you can't say only an idiot would believe such a thing. Because they will immediately turn you off. And
the wall comes up. The wall comes up.
This is one of the most solid, broadly confirmed findings in all of psychology, all of social science, really, is that if you challenge somebody's self-conception as a smart, decent person, they are not going to be convinced by what you say.
They don't care what you say. They categorize you as an enemy immediately, and then that's just it.
Yeah. So you want to be where the people are, and you want to be their kind of people, which is, that brings up a lot of challenges. And one is demographic turnover. So, skepticism has always been science adjacent. Kendrick Fraser used to say that, we should be very close to where science is. It would never do for skeptics to be more skeptical than the scientists themselves. And so, our movement is meant to be informed by the ethos and findings of science, by the methods of science to some extent. But science evolves with demographic turnover and with culture. And so, it may once have been radical to put in a wheelchair ramp at your university physics department, but that's not radical anymore. That's just a normal, expected thing. And as we go forward, the culture of science is becoming increasingly dominated by women and young people, as just has to happen generationally. The norms of science going forward, of the institutions, of our journals and our university departments, our governing bodies of research itself, the ethical standards of research, those norms will be set by millennials and Generation Z. And they have opinions about women in the workplace, about diversity, about inclusion, and ultimately those opinions will dominate in that culture. If we want to be relevant to that culture, honestly, we're going to have to keep up.
Sure. Was there something else I wanted to touch on here? Celestia says Steve Novella and Richard Saunders are both doing TikToks now. They tackle one question, they tackle one question in a short time frame, and throw out the link to the podcast. That's perfect, I think. I mean, it's. Yeah.
I don't mean to over broad brush.
Sure.
There have been hundreds and thousands of skeptics worldwide who have always done what they could to contribute, and we're still doing that.
And I don't think that's what Celestia is saying. Just making us. I have actually come
making
across
us aware that
exactly.
Yeah, there's some good outreach happening.
I actually have come across a Steve Novella TikTok or two on Reels. So that's good. But again, my algorithm is probably skewed.
Well, I mean, Steve is no spring chicken anymore, but he has big platforms, and he's a really responsible speaker too. So he's not hugely off-putting. he's a smart guy with no particular scandals. He's for an older
Yeah,
gentleman such as myself, he's a very good role model.
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Celestia also says shorter form social media does sort of handicap any skeptical messaging, since the quick answer is often not the entirely right answer. A nuance takes paragraphs. Well, that's obviously true. I mean, it's hard to argue
Yeah, and
against that.
it's part of the
And
bullshit
that's
asymmetry principle there.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
kind of the reason that why. And I think you could do this on TikTok too. But like when I publish an article on AIPTcomics.com in the science section, I always try when I'm like I do some but not a lot of original research. A lot of it is again in that SkepComm vein that I'm trying to take advantage of, is where I take other people's research and try to bring it to other people. So I'm always linking back at the very least to the original stuff and the big article. So if somebody is interested enough, they can go find the good information after the pithy 1,000 words if that's not enough for them.
I saw something up thread. There was a little bit of chatter about trans issues. I wouldn't mind circling back to.
You sure?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. I just wanted to say this is an issue I did not care about at all, except insofar as I want everybody to be, have well-being and happiness and safety in our society. But it was just not on my radar, except as a vague philosophical curiosity. Until trans people became explicitly, cynically targeted as a scapegoat group, with surrounding conspiracy theories. Now, what I notice online and chatter about this is there's only two camps, and I'd encourage skeptics to be in neither.
Yes. And they're
Yeah.
and both camps are convinced that they're right and the science is on their side.
Yeah, so I would encourage skeptics to acknowledge that two things can simultaneously be true. That there can be things that you personally don't understand, or which we collectively as humanity have not worked out yet, findings that just don't exist in science yet, open questions, and so on. We don't have to be committed gender ideologues to also acknowledge that there are conspiracy theories targeting vulnerable people. And the first area I actually think is a terrible area for skeptics. I wish we had never gotten involved in any respect, because skeptics are really bad collectively at talking about political issues and culture issues, and particularly unsettled science. We're not great on those things. Things that involve abstracts and moral virtues and vices and philosophical uh, distinctions that science cannot make. But we are, conspiracy theories, particularly harmful conspiracy theories, are our bread and butter. And so you can oppose harmful conspiracy theories, call those out, without having any philosophical commitments on this topic. And I'd encourage skeptics to do that.
Yeah, hey, very well said. I think that's a position that's hard to argue with, and maybe the most sensible thing I've heard from our community in a long time on that topic. So I'm going to ask right now if there's anything else that you'd like to talk about. In the meantime, if anybody else has a question, like I said before, put question in all caps followed by your question, and I will read it shortly. Daniel, is there anything else that you would like to talk about, given this brainstorming open forum?
Well, we've covered a lot of the ground that I kind of hope to get to. I feel like I've halfway dropped a manifesto here after all.
Oh, is that a tease?
No, I don't think I've been
Come
writing
on.
it up. But yeah, these are the things that build like steam pressure in my head, and then I send out a cryptic tweet. It's kind of nice to just sit down and talk about them openly. Yeah, because I still want to help, and I still love skepticism, and I want a bright future, and democracy and an ability to respond to pandemics and so on.
That'd be nice.